Hi, I'm Ronnie Sassoon, and I'm the author of a new book called Selection, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California. It's the home of Modernism Week, a week-long architecture and design festival that actually lasts 11 days. Again this year, U.S. Modernist Radio was there, speaking with nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers plus special guests. Most of them joined us poolside at the U.S. Modernist compound, the retro Hotel Skylark on North Palm Canyon Drive in Palm Springs. If you're in the mid-century modern, Modernism Week is a non-stop extravaganza of mid-century architecture, nonprofit benefit events, architecture documentary premieres, eye-popping house parties, brilliantly curated house tours, and much more. I'm Tom Guild. One place we visit every year, and one thing most people say is the highlight of their trip, is what's called Frey House 2. Albert Frey spent a year just sitting up in the mountains above Palm Springs looking for the perfect place to put a 1,000-square-foot house and pool. He found it, and we bring folks up there to see how he sort of built the house into the boulders of the mountain. Then, you get to turn around and see the view, which is just astounding. And now, the host of roughly 100 modernist parties in the last 12 years, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, it is something to go to a party, but to host it, you get to have a whole different view.
Yes.
You get to organize where the refreshments are coming from, figure out how you're going to make the place look great, figure out what kind of experience you want people to have. It's been a real pleasure to be a host of not just the big events that we do around the country, but also here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where we're based. We've had something for about the last 10 or 12 years called Thirst for Architecture, which is a monthly party that we'll have at an architect's office or a furniture store or a fixtures place. Perhaps it'll be a tile and marble or a carpet and flooring place. And what happens is people just come from all over to hang out and talk with each other and share their great love of modernism. I want to encourage all of you who are listening out there to organize this for your own areas because it's a great way to get people of like mind together. When we go out to Palm Springs, I really like taking people to the Palm Springs Museum of Art because in addition to having an outstanding art collection of desert pieces and desert artists, the building itself is also phenomenal. It was designed by E. Stewart Williams, who also designed a bank that is now the Palm Springs Architecture and Design Museum. It's just a few blocks away from the main museum. You can walk over there. Both of these buildings are an excellent way to spend some time exploring downtown Palm Springs. If you'd like to join Tom and me at Modernism Week in 2023 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist compound, email me at george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Los Angeles, Toronto, Palm Springs, and Malibu, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In a classic tale that we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll worked her way through college, dancing like no one's watching to Mambo No. 5 and brilliantly house-flipping Neutra houses, sometimes simultaneously. At 22, following a celebrity-filled party at a famous hillside modernist house in Los Angeles involving late-night swimming, fig-infused goat cheese, absolute lime, and a new use for WD-40, Angela was recruited to architecture school. There, she spent years in sleep-deprived design studios. Now she's a modernist real estate agent with specialized design training, advising buyers and sellers on everything, from appropriate renovation to staging a martini party for 200 people from 2,800 miles away. That last sentence is 100% true. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or call 919-995-0550. Today we travel to 3 sunny destinations outside of Palm Springs that were featured at this year's Modernism Week lectures: Florida, Cuba, and San Diego. Starting up, the New York Times calls Charles Phoenix the King of Retro for his spirited and hilarious slideshows celebrating the mid-century American lifestyle. Raised in Ontario, California, not Canada, the son of a car salesman and a so-called happy homemaker, Charles Phoenix grew up with a love of classic cars and an eye for design. He started collecting vintage Kodachrome slides in the 1990s and has been giving talks and creating colorful coffee table books, plus a YouTube video series of classic car joyrides, and hosting fun double-decker bus tours during Modernism Week. Here's our conversation poolside with Modernism Week favorite Charles Phoenix.
Charles, thank you for coming back on the show. It's always so fun to see you and hear you whenever you're doing a talk.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be back in Palm Springs. I'm actually delighted to be back on U.S. Modernist Radio.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm such a big fan of all the things that you've done to make, modernism so accessible, like crazy, like nobody else has done. So you are a hero of mine. So,
well, thank you. And likewise.
Well, thank you.
Well, I may be a hero, but I'm not as much of a hero as you because I understand that you're now on Cameo.
Cameo, yeah, cameo.com, where you do personal video greetings for people.
Tell me, how is that?
Well,
to
basically,
be a provider?
You get hired by people that are, fans or whatever, to give a personal video greeting. They pay money. In my case, it's $49, and then cameo.com takes about $14 out of that. And then they give me, whoever hires me, gives me a little list of who it's for, what their name is, and what their interests are, or why they're interested in having me give them a personal video greeting.
Yeah.
And then I hold my phone up and push the button, and Cameo takes care of all of the everything. And you just then, when you're done, you do the greeting, which I usually do about 5 minutes, and then you push upload, and it sends it off. It's very easy.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So,
This is what Sean Spicer was doing, wasn't it?
A lot of people do it.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's on there. So, I mean, the world has changed so much, and, Cameo's part of that change.
So how many requests have you done so far?
I was just looking at the report and it said like $7,800 worth.
Wow,
that's a lot.
That's like a couple hundred.
That's good pocket money.
Yeah.
That's what I call pocket money.
Yeah.
Because you need it in this world.
Yeah,
You
walking
need it to
around money.
buy like books and stuff. The one thing I never feel guilty about is buying books. The only thing is they're piling up in my house. How much do we love books?
Yeah.
Where do we begin?
Yeah.
And the old magazines, which you are putting online.
Right.
Which is a good
We'll take
thing.
them off your hands. We'll send you a label.
Right,
You can
right.
put them in a box. Send it to us.
They stack up pretty quick. But anyway, so yeah, going on about all that stuff.
So do you get a lot of Modernist fans asking you to do a cameo for like another Modernist fan?
Well, not particularly. I mean, they do say that this person likes mid-century modern and all that. I do hear that a lot.
Uh-huh.
So in that case, then I will bring up Palm Springs because as it has become known as the Mecca of mid-century, it's kind of an easy connection point. And, a lot of people who come here to Palm Springs, they really don't know that much about architecture.
Right.
Today on my bus tour, I said, do we have an architect on the bus? And no architects. How about an engineer? No engineers. I mean, there's two reasons they're on the tour. One is, I've been doing this for a while. They enjoy my enthusiasm. I say I'm not an expert. I'm an enthusiast. I also say that I make up half the stuff, but which I do not, by the way.
No.
That is not my jam, making stuff up. I'm really about the real hard facts as best as possible, as much as possible. So, I say, if I'm making something up, it's going to be obvious that I'm making it up because it's fun or
It's a
something.
joke.
Or goofy good times.
Yeah.
But in reality, I want to paint a real true picture about the world of Palm Springs that we see on my bus tour. Now, I forgot your question. What was it?
Not forgotten.
What's your favorite color, man?
My favorite color? Oh, there are so many. I like it all. No fear of color here. I actually like color. And I'm looking forward to the point in our world where we get past gray.
Okay.
Everything's been painted gray. And this building is not exactly gray. I call this mushroom, but I'm so against it. We need color now more than ever.
We do.
Color, color, color. And I'm not saying bright, crazy colors. They can be muted. They can be, or as they say it in the industry, dumbed down a little bit or whatever. But I want color. I want rich tones of beautiful hues of a full spectrum of color realized around the world.
Do you miss Kodachrome?
Do I miss Kodachrome? I don't miss Kodachrome because I'm with Kodachrome almost every single day, as I have been collecting other people's old Kodachrome slides for 30 years now, 30 years. So I do these retro slideshows live on stage. That's what I call them, retro slideshows, because they are, which, are basically fortified by my personal collection of other people's Kodachrome vacation slides and, slides they took at home as well. But yeah, I've been collecting a long time, and I have what I call the slibrary. I have a librarian who's been with me 17 or is 18 years this year, and she keeps everything in order. And I just did a show at the Palm Springs Art Museum, the Annenberg Theater there. It's a lovely theater. I did it as I do every year here at Modernism. This year, my topic was Florida in the 50s and 60s, as seen through the lens of tourists. So I have all these Kodachrome slides of Florida, and I had to go through about a zillion of them. They were all organized into their topics, and I went through all of them and then came up with, what an hour-and-a-half show wound up to be was about 100 and, how many was it, 105 or 6 slides that represent the tourist experience in Florida in the 50s with an emphasis on architecture.
Now, let me ask you, when you're presenting,
yes,
are you using an actual Kodak machine,
no,
or have you digitized these?
Not anymore. They've long been digitized. I mean, I started to digitize in 2007 for my presentations, my projections, because the rooms that I was doing these shows in got too big, and we got the big high-powered giant projector, and I, dropped a slide down, and that burnt my slide.
Yeah, I was beginning to wonder.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen anymore.
Right.
And so then, poof, out of nowhere comes somebody who now is a lifelong friend who said, I can digitize all of this for you, or digitize your shows, show you how to do it, so it's going to look as though you're really projecting. And I'm like, I can't do digital. I cannot do digital. There are several reasons why. He's like, no, trust me, you can. I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not really a techie person. That's just not the lane in the world of my life that I'm in. So it was challenging. But
that's when you
I've learned
have to
do
delegate.
Well, I do delegate to a point, but it's really not that complicated. I use the Keynote program in Apple, and I've learned to do it obviously in Photoshop and all that stuff. But when I first started to do it, I'm like, I can't, because I am a purist and I want people to see Kodachrome color, because when you project the actual transparency that is Kodachrome film, you are getting more colors and hues. I've never said hues more than I'm saying it right now on this show. Hues and tones and colors that digital projection is not capable of doing. The myriad of hues and tones. Wait, what are we even talking about?
Right.
That the actual Kodachrome transparency has. Did you know that? Digital can't do it.
Yeah.
They can give you a reasonable facsimile. And my friend who helped me said, you know what? Your audience doesn't care. They just want to see the image. They don't care if it's the actual slide being projected or if it's digital. And they don't know the difference.
The first time you see your slide disappear into melted plastic
is not
in the
a
projector, that's when you sort of got to say, I got to do something.
Right. And so then I realized that doing it digitally allowed me to do all kinds of things, like, which I don't like to do, but is crop into an image or something if I need to. I'm still a purist. I like to keep the frame as it was captured, because I am a purist. But, sometimes a little Photoshop helps. I mean, the way Kodachrome scans, sometimes it can scan dark. And so, I've learned to kind of know the tricks of Photoshop to figure out how to make it look its best for presentation.
So are the pictures of people or houses?
Oh, everything. Everything that people would have taken pictures of. Orange groves, yes. As a matter of fact, I included a picture of a roadside orange juice stand, an oranges stand in Florida that was taken in the 50s by tourists. It's called Maxie Groves, and then I Googled it, and I'll be darned anyway if there wasn't much more of a story there when I Googled the topic than I anticipated learning about. And, Mrs. Maxie had Mr. Maxie murdered in 1966.
Oh.
Yes. So anyway, there was a murder involved. But, I try to research.
How much juice that cost?
Well, very good. Where's the drums?
We had those in post.
That was quick. So, it has been an amazing miracle of my life to have discovered Kodachrome. I mean, to see other people's vacation slides, and slides in general, from the 50s and 60s and 70s has been a really interesting learning experience. I mean, I've traveled around the world. I've time traveled around the world.
Yeah.
And so, when you find something really unique, unusual, or something that's, rarely captured, I mean, it is a particular high that you do not get. So yes, I collect imagery. I collect other people's old Kodachrome slides.
So let's go back to Florida.
Yes, Florida.
In a time that many people don't remember, pre-Disney.
Pre-Disney. That was my show.
Yeah, this is your whole deal here.
Yeah.
When there were no interstates, there's no Disney, there's no Universal. The Orlando airport is just like a little strip that you land on. So where were some of the places people went on vacation?
Well, a lot
Florida?
of the places they still go now. I mean, Florida had well established itself as a tourist destination for, Midwesterners and East Coasters by the 1930s, even the 20s. I mean, the wealthy people started traveling there in the 20s. And then, little by little, by the time the 50s came around, there were these motels on the beach by the dozens and dozens, by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
And then air conditioning got invented.
And then air conditioning in the 50s. Some of them say air conditioning, pool, TV. Well, they all have swimming pools.
Color TV.
Color TV. So, it's an architectural show that it's unique to Florida. They had a whole style guide that was all their own. Their flamboyant fronts on the fronts of these motels, kind of the middle level motel. Oh, yeah, they called them motels there. Palm Springs had never had a motel, but in Florida they had motels. And then also there's Miami Beach. And there's all the architecture of Morris Lapidus, which, is a fascination to discover and to research and to see images of. But then there's also all the tourist attractions, these roadside attractions that grew out of nature, like Weeki Wachee, where the mermaids swim and all that.
Oh, yeah.
That started in 1947.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's still going strong. There's Silver Springs, where you look through the glass-bottom boat.
Yep.
It's been there since 78, the glass-bottom boats, and they're still there.
My mom was born in Orlando, and so we would often go down there on vacation long before Disney. And all of these things were always like staples of our visits: the glass-bottom boats, the girls on the skis,
At Cypress Gardens.
Yeah, Cypress Gardens.
Yeah, I
that's
didn't
it.
mention that. That's the
Yeah.
other one. That was the most famous one, Cypress Gardens.
Yeah.
So Cypress Gardens was the grandest attraction in all of Florida pre-Disney, the most famous because it had the best PR guy, the guy who owned it, who was some wealthy industrialist from upstate New York or something like that, and also a brilliant promoter. And it's all about promoting.
Yep.
So Cypress Gardens became the most famous tourist destination.
Where was that?
Well, it's in
Is that
what?
Coconut Grove?
No,
area?
it's not Coconut. It's the Cypress Gardens are still there, though they are no longer really an attraction. About 15 years ago, I guess, Legoland built there at Cypress Gardens, but they kind of built like in the parking lot area, so they didn't really ruin the original gardens. There's also something very interesting there in the realm of swimming pools, which is a huge topic here in Palm Springs and in Florida, and that is they built a swimming pool there in the shape of the state of Florida for a Esther Williams movie, who was a famous swimming star in the 40s and 50s in the movies. And when I went there 6 years ago, I'm like, where's the Florida-shaped swimming pool? And they're like, that's long gone. I'm like, I'll see for myself, thank you. So I meander my way through kind of the closed-off gardens at what had now become Legoland, and I'll be darned anyway if, like, through the thick of this garden, whoa, there it was. There was the Florida-shaped swimming pool at Cypress Gardens in shockingly almost perfect condition, not covered over with moss, not ruined by the swamp that surrounds it or whatever. I love the folly. I love the showmanship of the roadside attractions. I mean, they're all trying to outdo each other with their facades and their signs and, parrot jungle, monkey jungle. It's just dozens. It just goes on and on and on in Florida. So it's a really interesting topic to dive into. And there are, of course, books about it, the Sunshine State and all that. And they had these little mid-century modern buildings. I think they had 44 of them that said, "Welcome to Florida," and they would give you free orange juice. But they're these little adorable mid-century modern buildings with a signboard that come up, and in neon, "Welcome to Florida." And then on the other side of that, it says, "Hurry back to Florida," or whatever. I mean, we love all that stuff.
I remember growing up, there were these little plastic oranges that would have a straw in the top.
Oh, yeah.
And they were at almost every different roadside attraction. And they would give you some form of orange juice or orange aid or orange soda.
And then there's Orange Bird. That's a character that was invented by Disney for Florida, the orange juice world, the orange world, the empire that was oranges in Florida. And, you mentioned Disney. I'm not anti-Disney or anything like that, but it's just that, if we're going to start to get into Disney World, it's a whole different level of topic than if we're going, pre-1971.
Right.
It's basically in the world of Florida tourism, it's pre-Disney and post-Disney. So not mad at Disney or anything like that. It's just that the show that I was doing called Florida Land here at Palm Springs Modernism Week live on stage, which, by the way, I will be doing live online as well. I've taken to doing my shows online now because of you know what. So you know what.
You're just shy.
Well, I mean, because of it.
Yeah.
I was forced to take my shows online.
The virus that will not say its name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I was forced to take my shows online, which was really, at the end of the day, a blessing in disguise because I'm able to reach people from all over the world. So my shows that I do online are often heavily fortified with vintage slides, but I also include some of my travels and experiences in going to visit these places that still exist. And, you know, it's always something kind of crazy happens. There's always some story that turns out to tell, or there turns out to be some story to tell, which is fun.
Well, finding the Florida pool must have just been thrilling.
Well, I mean, I never had done the
That's like archaeology,
Yeah.
really.
Well, it's all like archaeology.
Was it overgrown?
Well,
Did you have to-
the Florida pool. You're going back to Florida.
yeah, right.
The Florida pool, not that overgrown. I mean, at Cypress Gardens, yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, the whole thing is archaeology.
Which
I mean, going
is,
through
it's
these,
near Winter Haven.
It is
Yeah.
near Winter Haven. Oh,
Yeah.
just the name Winter Haven. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Whoa! How much do we love just a city named
Right.
Winter Haven? I
I
want to
know.
go there.
If you're in Connecticut, sounds great.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why they named it that for you people of Connecticut. Are
I
you
was
from
born
Connecticut?
I was born in Connecticut.
I
My
knew
mom
it.
was born in Orlando. Ultimately, we all wound up in North Carolina, but yeah,
You did. So you kind of did a little...
met halfway.
Not quite halfway,
Yeah.
kind of. Well, anyway, yeah, I mean, doing what I do, the archaeology of it all, and, you know, it's so many things. It's fashion, it's architecture, signage, graphics. I mean, all that, just the culture of the era, the culture of the style and design that was afforded the middle class in the mid-century era of this country is absolutely the golden era. It's pretty crystal clear. I mean, the quality of the design and style and the products that were manufactured at that time are off the charts, and that's why we revere them so much today. You know, like the cars and stuff. I no longer refer to classic cars as classic cars. That's yesterday's news. We are calling them world-class national treasures. Because, I mean, why not? Because let's call them what they are. It's also important to pass
And they're
this
still
in-
being driven in Cuba.
Well, they're still being driven here. Have
No,
you
that's
seen
true,
them?
too,
I
yeah.
mean, Cuba's a different story. But the reality is, it's really important to pass this information on to the younger generation. And frankly, I'm really impressed by how many 20s and 30-somethings that I encounter in my work that, you know, say, oh, we're just crazy about mid-century. We love it or whatever. And we know all about it because, you know, any topic that we're interested in researching, you know, they're on their phone and 5 minutes later or an hour later or overnight, they happen to know everything about it because they've read it all. I'm like, yeah, we had to go to the library and
Yeah.
realize there were no books about this stuff back in the 70s and 80s. So you 20 and 30-somethings are lucky because you can research it, boom, overnight, and you're there.
When all of this began to fall out of favor, really,
Yeah.
in the 70s and 80s and became regarded as kitsch, when did it come back as something that people remembered more fondly and began to embrace again and take on like they're doing now?
Well, you know, part of the machine of American pop culture is that the big guys, the manufacturers and their public relations firms are very good at teaching us to hate the product they made last year and force us to think we needed the new product this year to be in style.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's fighting a very difficult fight back in the day for people to not think what they had that was last year's, you know, car or furniture or whatever, to think they needed to buy the new stuff. So we're programmed to think old stuff is tacky. Well, you know, in the 90s in Palm Springs, I'll say, I remember very distinctly driving around Palm Springs thinking to myself, Palm Springs the bones are here. This is a wonderland to discover. And it was run down, and a lot of the families and people that have lived here for decades, they either died or moved on and built bigger properties in Palm Desert or Rancho Mirage or whatever and all that. And Palm Springs was kind of left as, well, kind of tacky.
Yeah.
And, you know, as I distinctly recall, some of my more sophisticated friends in Los Angeles who were very into mid-century modern architecture and kind of discovering it in the 90s as something special, and the movement is something very interesting to look into. They started coming down here and then in droves started bringing people. Like, and I was one of them. You got to see this house. You got to see this house. I'm going to do a tour. So in the mid-late 90s is when this Palm Springs thing started, you know, really blowing up. And I mean, it was slow, and then people from San Francisco Francisco who are sophisticated and know good design when they see it. They started coming. People from New York. There's a guy from GQ magazine who was one of the first guys to restore a house in one of the Wexler Steel homes.
Okay.
So he was one of the first guys. In fact, when I was here in 97 on a tour, that was basically the only house that had been restored to its mid-century perfection, and it's still happening. It's still there. So it was a slow build, and it's still a slow build. We're working against the almighty deep pockets of corporate America to bulldoze as much as possible to build corporate America. So little by little, this stuff kind of goes away. But in fact, here in Palm Springs, this movement, and it's still a fight here. The developers realized the critical mass has arrived in Palm Springs in droves, enough for us to sink a lot of corporate dollars into redeveloping this town into nothing but chains, and they want to tear everything down. So I'm not really an alarmist, and I don't really live in that lane. I am a realist. I realize some of that's going to happen. But, what I am here to do is not talk about that, but I'm here to talk about what we do have and why it's special and how to reach people and explain to them why this is special. And that's what I really love doing. Part of my appeal, I think, to my audience is that I am passionate about it, and I'm a little silly about it at times. You got to goose them a little.
Goose them.
But you got to make it, for me, my gut instinct on my selling of my passion and getting them to realize why this stuff is special, these places, these mid-century places are special, or other things, cars or whatever it is to be enthusiastic about it. Enthusiasm is the number one most important ingredient in theater and presentation, and that's kind of what I do. I get enthusiastic, but it's from the heart, and I mean it.
Yeah. Well, your shows are informative, entertaining, and people just come away with huge smiles on their faces.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I try to be informative and informal at the same time, although trying at all times to be as poised and proper and dignified as my grandmother always wanted me to be. But, and let's have a good time, you guys. Let's have fun.
I'm just so glad that you're able to, finally open up a little bit. And
You might as well just let it go. Cut loose.
Yeah.
Our time is brief on this planet. We might as well enjoy what we enjoy and share our passion and our fashion.
Speaking of that, Charles, my last question for you is a question I asked you last time, which you did not have an answer to.
What?
And I'm going to test you again.
Uh-oh.
So what is the Charles Phoenix succession plan for all these archives?
Oh, what is,
what's the plan?
My archive of other people's Kodachrome slides that I've been collecting for 30 years?
Yeah.
Well, as of about 2 years ago, the Getty, the lovely fine people at the Getty have landed on my planet.
Excellent.
And they're kind of, paying attention to me and talking to me, inviting me to the Getty and wanting to come over and see my collection and stuff. So I don't know. I really don't know. I don't have that plan. But the smart woman I know said, you better have a plan, because if you drop dead tomorrow, your collection could wind up in the garbage pail. And I'm like, well, I don't want that to happen. Or in the dumpster.
It happens a lot.
It happens a lot. It happens every day. I hear it every single day. We threw our family slides away in the garbage or whatever. No, I hear it every day. So, that's why it is important to have a plan. And, I need a plan.
So, Getty, if you're listening, you need to ramp this up.
Getty, can you hear me? Hi, Getty.
Hi, Getty.
You're awesome.
Keeping it modern, Getty.
I got to tell you also, seriously, not joking around, in the realm of what we call found photography, which is the strata of photography that I collect.
Yeah.
That's found photography. When I started doing that 30 years ago, there was no term found photography. There just wasn't. So, I was a little bit of a pioneer at that time, and I wasn't the only one doing it. But now it's skyrocketed into a thing. Found photography is a thing. But I will tell you, the art institutions and the institutions such as the Getty, they have really struggled with recognizing that category.
Yes.
They don't know how to recognize that category because they're all about designer brand names or famous artists that have a pedigree. And, amateur photography is like, what? They just don't know how to absorb it.
They need to get to know you.
They do. And they have
do they?
from time
okay,
to time.
Good.
I was
sounds
just
like
at Houston Fine Art Museum or whatever it's called. I was astounded by the beauty of this place. It was so beautiful. And I did a presentation there. And, they didn't know if they should laugh. And it was like, they didn't know. And it was like, you guys, we're just having fun. This is real people's photography. It's real photography. I will happen to say, after 30 years of doing this, I feel I'm a good curator of what I'm presenting. Good, strong imagery that really kind of helps build and tell the story. and I have stories to tell along with it. So, but you know, it's like it's not fine art photography, so they don't know what to do with it. So
You're allowed to titter.
titter? What's titter? Oh, titter?
You know.
Yeah, you're allowed. Exactly. Titter.
Titter than Twitter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
that's
the other
right.
thing, someone asked me today, what about the name mid-century? Like, where does that come from? And I said, well, to the best of my knowledge, the first time I ever heard about mid-century was Los Angeles Sunday Times in the 90s, maybe even the late 80s. Really, someone there in the Sunday department decided that they really wanted to focus on these 1950s homes, these custom-built 1950s homes built in around Southern California. And every week they would feature one of these homes. And I don't know exactly when, but they started saying mid-century, mid-century, mid-century. So to me, it was the Los Angeles Times.
We're going to have to look that up, Tom.
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I mean,
find
I
that
could be
person.
wrong exactly
Because
where
before
came
that,
from.
they were just new houses.
Yeah, they were just houses.
Well, mid-century is a term that I say came into play in the 90s. As I tell the audiences, Art Deco is a term that came into being in the 60s. They didn't call Art Deco architecture in the 30s Art Deco. It didn't.
Yeah.
The term didn't exist. So also Googie, 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 Googie. That was a word that came into being in the 80s when the book Googie came out, the book by Alan Hess and Jim Hyman,
Yeah.
two of my heroes of heroes.
Yes.
Yep.
That book, I love. That book really changed my life. So, anyway.
Well, Charles,
But
thanks.
oh, you're welcome.
He's out of words?
I am.
Charles, thanks for coming by again. We love talking with you.
Thank you.
And we can't wait to see what you talk about next year here at Modernism Week.
We'll be there. Hopefully you will be too. I'll see you then.
George and I were talking with vintage Florida fan Charles Phoenix. 90 miles south of Florida, there's Cuba. The U.S. can't quite decide whether we're still mad at Cuba, but the architecture lives on, and architect Monty Freeman knows all about it. An award-winning New York architect who has repurposed timeless modern spaces around the world, Monty is an expert on Cuban architecture and leads architectural tours when the U.S. allows it. He's currently renovating a mid-century home in Havana. And now, Monty Freeman talking poolside with George Smart.
Monty, I think it's fair to say that most people in America have never been to Cuba,
Correct.
don't know much about Cuba, really. They hear about a guy named Castro. They hear about cigars, right? If they press a little more, they hear about old cars rolling through the streets. They hear about some of the music. If they're a Neutra fan, they hear about a famous house that Neutra did in Cuba. But, that's kind of the extent of general knowledge. So I need you to help me go into a little deeper dive about the architecture in Cuba and what that's all about.
Okay, well, you're correct. It's unfortunate that most Americans, most people world round, don't know anything much about Cuban culture, Cuban architecture, its history, and it's incredibly rich, the architectural legacy in Cuba from the 17th century all the way through up to the modern period, up through the 1960s and 70s.
So let's start with today. What is Cuba like today? It's under a new regime. Is it still
Well,
Castro's brother who was running things?
Raul Castro retired, stepped down a couple of years ago, so there's a new president. The first time there's been a president of Cuba in 60 years that doesn't have the surname Castro.
Okay.
It's Miguel Diaz-Canel, and he's young by the standards of Cuban hierarchy. He's merely in his late 50s, and he's a party guy, and he's the president now, though Raul is still the head of the party, the Communist Party, so there's
Okay.
definitely, you can't call it a new regime, it's a continuation of the old one, but with new faces.
Over the last 10 years, I think since the Obama administration, the gates have opened and closed and relaxed and tightened about who can go to Cuba and under what conditions. What's that all about now?
Oh, it's tragic. I can't overestimate the enthusiasm and positive feelings that were generated by Obama's policies during his presidency. And the Cubans were absolutely ecstatic when the Obama family visited Havana. And it was felt like this was the opening of a new era, Obama reaching out to Cuba and Raul having succeeded his brother, was much more pragmatic and open to modifying, updating the relationship with the United States. And so it's a very heady period.
Cruise ships started going
Cruise ships started going. The Americans were allowed, still not for just idle tourism, but very liberal policy of cultural tourism, educational tours, a lot of what they called people-to-people exchanges. And there was a big jump in North Americans going to Cuba. I myself led several architectural tours of Cuba during those years. Then, most unfortunately, the Trump administration closed all of that down. They made it very restrictive for Americans to travel to Cuba, along with another raft of repressive measures of limiting the amount of money that Cuban Americans families could send to their relatives in Cuba, and a whole lot of other restrictive measures trying to tighten the screws on Cuba economically and politically. And to my great distress and disappointment, the Biden administration has not lifted those Trump-era restrictions yet.
Well, without getting too much into the politics of it, why are some parts of the United States still mad at Cuba?
Well, it's really just South Florida and the Cuban immigrant population there that still feels dispossessed by the revolution, the Castro revolution in Cuba. And I can understand it. I mean, I have Cuban family. I'm half Cuban. And I can understand the emotional pain of being exiled from one's home country. But that doesn't translate into policy automatically. And the policy of trying to isolate Cuba, maintain the embargo, the punitive embargo against Cuba, and restricting family remittances to Cuba, that's a policy that's been in place since the Kennedy administration for 60 years. And it hasn't done any good. It's been ineffective. All it has accomplished is punishing the ordinary Cubans, the population of Cuba. It hasn't changed the Cuban government in 60 years. So, one would logically think it's time to try something new,
right,
which Obama was attempting to do.
Okay.
And I hope that we get back there on that road to more rational and humane policy.
In your trips to Cuba, where you
Yes.
take people to see the architecture,
Yes.
is there a lot of modern architecture in Cuba?
Oh, my goodness, yes. People think of Havana, they think of old Havana, which incredibly beautiful and rich colonial architectural legacy. But the modern architecture is just astounding. In the post-World War II era, Cuba was very wealthy, very cosmopolitan society, big building boom after the war, great riches in the country both from sugar industry and from tourism.
And rum
Cigars, tourism, a lot of investment from North America, a lot of it unsavory investment from organized crime that got into the gambling business big time in Cuba.
Yeah.
It was like Las Vegas, in the Caribbean.
My mom, I found out after she died, would take these long weekends in Havana.
Yes.
Would fly down there.
Yes.
And just, party and not tell her mom.
Oh, it was a favorite tourism destination definitely with a hedonistic overlay.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a sort of a club of friends in New York, people my age, that is, born before the revolution.
Right.
A club of people who've done the math and figured out that they were conceived in Cuba because it was a favorite honeymoon destination.
That's a good bumper sticker, conceived in Cuba.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right? So tell me about some of the modernist buildings in Cuba that one might see or hear about if they got to visit.
Okay, well, there are splendid hotels. Some of them in the flamboyant sort of Las Vegas or Miami style.
Miami style, yeah.
Yeah, like the Hotel Riviera, which was designed by an American firm, Johnson and Polovitsky. The Hotel Capri, which was designed by Cuban architect Ugalde. And right before the revolution in the 1950s, Cuba was also going high-rise with some very distinguished mixed-use towers going up. A favorite is the Seguro Medico building by Antonio Quintana. But really, it was in the area of the single-family private house where Cuban architects showed the most inventive creativity. There are neighborhoods in Cuba like Miramar, which is the close-in suburb just west of the city.
Is that spelled like Miramar in the U.S.?
Miramar,
Okay.
yeah, with the ocean. That is just, actually, here in Palm Springs, it reminds me of Miramar, just block after block of beautiful modernist houses. Even the ordinary ones, are just so beautifully designed, and it's all modern. Cuban upper middle class society after World War II just was enthusiastically modernist. I think it was a phenomenon that is common with other parts of Latin America, Mexico, Brazil, Venezuela, where modernism was seen as a ticket of entry into the first world economy and political, circles.
It was the future, right?
It was the
optimism.
Future. Optimism. It was the future. It was Latin America rising as an economic power. And it must have been very heady. And so you had upper middle class families commissioning homes from great architects, not foreign architects, but Cuban architects. Like Mario Romagnac, Frank Martinez, Max Borges, Max Borges was also the architect of the fabled Tropicana Club.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which is a tour de force of thin shell concrete construction, all these vaults.
Yes.
Leaping over this tropical landscape, inside, outside, just magnificent. Max Borges also happened to have his father was an architect also, and he designed several houses for members of my mother's family.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just still standing there.
And Cuba was perceived to be so exotic at the time. It was just
exotic, alluring.
You had Desi Arnaz on TV with Lucy, right?
Right.
Who was a walking billboard for Cuba.
That's true. Yes. So, but that sort of strays also into sort of stereotyping Cuba. And when I take people down there to look at the architecture, I try very hard to get beyond that.
Of course.
To see what a interesting and cosmopolitan and outward-looking society it was, very receptive to new ideas from everywhere in the world. I mean, it's very interesting and deep history, social history.
So I have a minutia question I
Yes.
wanted to ask you, since you're more of an expert in this than most people. So I read when the virus started up, when COVID kicked in,
Yes.
that the Cuban medical community, which is very heralded down there.
Yes, very highly developed.
Because they have a public health system that everyone has access to.
Absolutely.
That they were able to develop a vaccine very, very quickly for their population.
That's right.
And head off, quite a number of the deaths that have affected other countries throughout the world.
That's true.
Is this true?
Absolutely true. Tragically, Cuba, because of the U.S. commercial embargo on Cuba did not have access to any of the other...
like the Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna, all that.
They were blocked from purchasing those vaccines. But, so they developed their own, and they already had a very sophisticated and advanced pharmaceutical industry in Cuba. They were already making vaccines against measles and mumps and polio and stuff like that. So they just switched all their efforts towards developing COVID vaccines. And they developed two that proved to be highly effective. They also imposed a very strict policy of vaccinating the population.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Cuba is a highly educated population. There's no vaccine skepticism in Cuba, none. And they don't give any truck to religious objections either. And I mean, it's definitely one of the things that a authoritarian government can do very well.
Right.
They say you get vaccinated, you get vaccinated. But, there was no resistance to getting vaccinated. So consequently, Cuba has the highest level of vaccination and the second highest level of infection and mortality in the world after the United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of good news doesn't get reported in the United States.
Right. The UAE, when the sheik tells you to go get jabbed, you go.
Exactly. There's a certain commonality there.
Well, what opportunities are there currently? Are there still organizations that have cultural trips to Cuba that one could sign up for now?
No.
No. It's
No.
all gone?
It's all gone until Biden administration
Okay.
Reinstates them. I'll take it back. I teach at Columbia University, and I could take, as I do, have done every year for the past few years until the pandemic hit, I can still take students there as educational tours,
Okay.
but it has to be for a degree-granting credit,
Yes,
for
very
credit
serious,
course.
yes.
Not the, Society of Architectural Historians.
Because clearly they're not serious
Which
enough.
they're very serious architecture aficionados, and I've taken 2 wildly successful trips there with the SAH. But that sort of what they call cultural people-to-people travel is not yet allowed again. Hopefully it will be soon.
Yeah, let's hope that comes back, because
Yeah.
that would be a great thing to see going again on so many fronts.
On so many fronts, just so valuable, so valuable. I myself can and do travel back and forth a lot because I have relatives, I have cousins who live in Cuba.
Okay.
And so
family members can still
travel
go.
is still allowed. That's
Okay.
one thing that even Trump didn't dare take away, because the Miami Cubans would be very upset if they couldn't go visit their families
visit
there.
their families.
As much as they disapprove of their being there in a communist country, they still wanted to be able to travel back and forth.
Well, Monty, this is fascinating. Thank you so much for talking with me.
My total pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Architect Monty Freeman was talking with George Smart about Cuban modernism. Finally, Keith York is a realtor who buys and sells architect-designed homes in San Diego. He created the Modern San Diego website to help the community understand the area's rich architectural heritage, home to projects by architects such as Frank Lloyd Wright, Craig Elwood, Gregory Ain, and Al Beadle. Keith recently curated the exhibit Frank Lloyd Wright's Legacy in San Diego and is working on a book about architect Sim Bruce Richards. He lives in the Point Loma neighborhood and is restoring his second mid-century house. Here's George with Keith York.
Keith, how far is it from San Diego to Palm Springs?
By way of my house,
Yeah.
2.5 hour drive. The northern reaches as little as a little over an hour, right?
Really?
The county is quite large, east to west and north to south. I happen to live just so far south that it takes me longer than many San Diegans to get here. Yeah.
Is that sort of the south part near Mexico?
I live closer to downtown, which
Okay.
people think is in the center of the county, but it is not in the center of the county.
Really?
And to get to a freeway to get to Palm Springs, I live in a particular neighborhood, Point Loma, where there are so many surface streets to get to the freeway before you launch yourself north, right, to either Los Angeles or Palm Springs. So, for example, most San Diegans would say, LA, Palm Springs, 2 hours. I always have to add 15 extra minutes, probably.
Of course, Palm Springs is a huge destination for people in LA who have second houses. Is that the same for San Diego, or do they tend to stay down there where it's so cool and such a hip spot?
San Diego has a very similar relationship to Palm Springs that LA has historically. There is a bedroom community, Borrego Springs, where some people affordably can have their second weekend home that in many cases is mid-century modern. But I have a lot of friends, colleagues, clients even, that I've worked with over the years that have second homes here in Palm Springs. Yeah.
Now, where is Borrego Springs in relation to San Diego?
Due east.
East, okay.
Northeast. So San Diego is a coastal town in a fairly flat plain. And then as it progresses eastward, it goes into significant hills and even 6,000 plus altitude mountains. And then it drops precipitously down into the Anza Borrego Desert. Anza Borrego being a state park, but Borrego Springs is a small town adjacent to the desert, in the desert.
And why does it have so many mid-century modern houses in it?
I'm not an expert on Borrego Springs by any measure. I do know quite a bit, but much like Palm Springs, weekend golfing, vacationing, there's been always historically little resort hotels there that have grown a little neighborhood, and not as many people built homes more contemporarily, but they did build homes, second homes, decades past, for sure.
I understand there are a bunch of little modernist neighborhoods in Borrego Springs.
Yeah. Bill Kreisel, who's well regarded, I think, for his contributions in L.A. and Palm Springs, and then some local San Diego architects would go out there and build, a handful of houses, and some nice, larger custom homes as well.
If I were to ask the average person, even the enthusiast,
Sure.
where were the centers for modernist architecture around the country, I don't think they would say San Diego, but I've been learning since I've been here how rich your area is.
Yeah.
What's there?
I think the first part of your question is any municipality that grew up post-Depression is going to have a larger, sizable inventory, if you will, of mid-century modern buildings, religious buildings, and homes, right? San Diego spread its wings after the war, so tract housing evolved as a thing at the same time building and builders and architects were thinking contemporarily what we now think of as mid-century. So I think San Diego, big chunks of Los Angeles, certainly here on the West Coast, portions of San Jose, for example, in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, grew up at the same time that architecture was alive. And that is where you find the greater inventories of this work. So if you look at an old town like, say, Philadelphia, which was very much well built by the beginning of the 20th century, you're not going to see as much mid-century architecture. But certainly San Diego and to our south, our southern neighbor, Tijuana, both grew up in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And these economic booms and these population booms happened when architecture looked that way. That way meaning how we now call mid-century modern architecture.
Well, before we get into the architecture more, this is
sure.
not a modernist question. It's
No.
more a modern question.
Yes.
I've been reading for a number of years that, of course, San Diego has its airport. It's one runway airport in the middle of town. But there was a creative way of creating a second airport on the Mexican border.
Yes.
How does that work?
So the funny debate about the airport, because there are actually multiple municipal and military airports in the region. The architect of my personal home was a big critic of the mid-city one runway airport. And so it's funny that I link with him as this advocacy of like, why do we constrain ourselves with this one airport right by the water? So the land value, the congestion, all these things are so weird contemporarily. But through the years, there was Brownfield, still is Brownfield, which is sort of a municipal airport down closer to Tijuana. And then there was the idea to expand it, as it presently is. Then there's to partner with the Tijuana Municipal Airport to have a cross-border runway system. And there's tracts of land. I mean, there's big, wide open spaces just north of Tijuana in California, right, that are understandably easy to build a flat runway airport. And it just can't seem to take root with anyone. There was a moment about, 2 presidents ago is somehow what I'm thinking, is that when military bases were outgrowing their usefulness, their utility, they were going to close one of the San Diego military airfields. And the potential there was this discussion to turn a real already there airfield into a civilian airport. That didn't take root. And it's just there's just a myriad of discussions about air travel and commerce around airports that don't seem to change. So we maximize that one runway we have. That's
what I was reading about is that evidently in this airport that's right on the border between the U.S. and Mexico, Americans can sort of come and go through the terminal in an unusual way and get back and forth to the country to use that as a alternative landing strip to San Diego.
It's so easy. You buy a ticket online with a QR code, and you park your car, you walk into this lobby-like space terminal, and they say, you have a ticket. Go that way. It's about the same distance you'd have in a normal airport in the U.S. You walk to.
So you cross the border
You
into
cross
Mexico.
the border inside the terminal.
Inside the building.
It's immediately like disarming.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy. And then similar, I mean, you do go through a customs check. That I
Right.
don't want to misstep on forgetting that. But on your return, you land in a foreign country,
In
and you're
Mexico.
like, I can see how to get to my parked car from there. It's amazing.
How long has that been going on?
I don't know. My family traveled to Mexico just a handful of years ago, and it was about as easy as the San Diego airport going from here to Phoenix. It was just you park your car or you get a ride to the airport, you get out of the car, you give someone your ticket, you tell them you're a passenger and you are
You just
supposed to
go on
fly,
in,
and
yeah.
you get on an airplane. And it's amazing.
That's pretty sweet. Your website, Modern San Diego, is awesome.
Thank
I
you.
got to say, it's one of the best sites in the country. Really, you've done an extensive amount of research and collecting photos and histories of houses. So, bravo!
Thank
When did
you.
you start that?
I think the dawn of the website, right, is somewhere around Y2K, right? So
For those of you that are very young, that's the year 2000, where we anticipated the end of the world and it didn't happen.
yes. And I think the dawn of, the internet was something in the late 90s because I worked on a university campus at the time and I had internet access. But by the time you could build a website and put pictures and text, I want to say it was right around 2001-ish. And then I couldn't even put a larger file on the internet. It was mostly text and these tiny little, what we would now call thumbnail images. So the earliest website, which I still have some files that have like a 2000, 2001 date on that, are the dawn of the site. And I was doing the coding myself in really terrible user interface software till I finally worked with a designer to make it look and feel a little bit more contemporary.
So originally, were you just posting listings for real estate, or
Yeah,
when did
I would-
it get more in depth to go beyond what was for sale?
I would say I posted a couple things for sale. I wrote an article in a print paper or a print magazine. I would take that Word document and cut and paste it and put, here's this story I wrote. So one of the earliest things I was interested in was, did Frank Lloyd Wright build anything in San Diego? This was this urban legend, whether or not he did. And so I wrote an early piece 20 years ago, and I sent it to a local magazine. They published it, and I then posted that same text on the internet. And that was like, wow, I can do this. I can do this
Yeah.
myself. And then you get addicted, or whatever your euphemism for getting excited and passionate about something, and that overtook a lot of my free time.
Yes, it has a way of doing that, doesn't
Yes. Yeah.
it? My wife refers to all this as a 15-year seizure.
Yes.
Yeah.
An extended life, whatever, not midlife, but extended life crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'll just say the unending, continuing amount of information that I still don't know. Right? There's so much that one person can digest and try to post to the internet, right? Or collate. There's more every day. I learn something more about my own town, where I grew up in, and where I was born.
Me too. We are always collecting information about North Carolina, adding that. Last year, we were able to get about 700,000 pages from AIA National. I believe it includes AIA San Diego's stuff.
I was CC'd on an email at
Yeah.
some point. I'm like, all right, George has got those. I have tangibly hand filtered through those or turned those pages. A lot of the architects I've met over the years that are now obviously deceased, they had those, right? They had those still in their home office. And they're like, oh, this is when I was president or secretary or vice president of the local chapter. But when you leaf through those, there's tons of historical, now that we see it as historical data, right? There's stuff in there that really tells the
Didn't
story.
appear anywhere else, really.
Right. It was inside baseball, professional speak, right? Yeah.
Unlike Frank Lloyd Wright, who was everywhere. So, was there a house or some structure that Wright did in San Diego?
So, great question, long answer, but he designed a couple of projects. They were not built. So
Okay.
that answers the question null and void. No, right?
Okay.
But he designed some stuff that was not built. His progeny, his acolytes, his apprentices, all these funny terms of people that studied under him, several of them moved to San Diego. They brought his work in one way or another to San Diego. John Lloyd Wright, his son, moved to San Diego and developed a body of work. Lloyd Wright, his other son, designed some work in San Diego. So there's a Wrightian legacy, but it's not Frank Lloyd Wright. Yeah. And
it's the next generation.
Exactly. And it's deep and interesting and fascinating, but because I speak to the general public more than I talk to architecture nerds or whatever you want to call them, I do start with Frank Lloyd Wright, because I can't even say Mies van der Rohe because they won't know what I'm talking about, right? So I say, the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. Oh, yeah, I know that. And then I can begin a conversation about interesting, unique architecture versus Starbucks and Walmart, right? Like just stuff that you go, okay, whatever. It's a building. It's a shelter. It's a structure. Yeah.
Well, I think still Frank Lloyd Wright's one of the few architects that the average person can name.
Right.
He's just been that famous.
Yeah.
No one has reached that level yet in popular culture.
Yeah. And the common myth, and I'm sure this exists in North Carolina and other places outside of San Diego, where people will say, the neighbor's house down the street, that's by Frank Lloyd Wright. The common. And so I bought a house that I later learned was by a different architect. But upon buying my first house, one of the neighbors was walking out in their front yard, and I'm like, do you know anything about the house I'm buying? Because it is unusual. And they're like, yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright built your house. Like, right to me.
Right.
Complete myth-making. Like, live and, like, real-time, like, no credible evidence. They just said, Frank Lloyd Wright did it. And I think they think that there was only one architect. Right. So that
there was only one modernist architect ever.
And he did all of it.
Yes.
Himself.
Across the country.
Yes. Yeah.
The thing I liked is when you get Frank Lloyd Wright inspired.
Yes.
You get that. Or you get someone who was an apprentice or employee of Frank Lloyd Wright, in North Carolina.
Right.
And Frank Lloyd Wright had no operations in North Carolina. But this is just more a matter of that the average person, and particularly the average realtor, doesn't necessarily know what a modernist house is.
Correct.
I don't know how your MLS system is in San Diego, but it took us years to convince our local Triangle MLS system to even have a modernist designation for the houses. And then most of the realtors would dump anything in there they didn't know how to label.
Right.
It could be a yurt.
Yes.
And they would be going in the modernist category.
Yeah, they'll use Frank Lloyd Wright style or inspired by all these sort of euphemistic ways of connecting him to it to hopefully draw some attention to something that is attentionless, right? Something that does not require our attention. I will say I see that so often, and I'm professional and polite, and I will say, hey, when you say Frank Lloyd Wright inspired, what part of this home are you referring to? And I'll get a nice email back, I just put it there. Oh, I just was saying it. We do that. But one time, about a year ago, this woman said Frank Lloyd Wright apprentice in her description. And I called her and I said, tell me what you know. And I can't remember his name right now. But it was an actual apprentice that retired in San Diego. I didn't know he ever lived in San Diego. And it was his own home. It's the only thing he did. It was his retirement home at about age 70.
Yeah.
But it was a great house. And I was like, you knew to use the word apprentice. And I congratulated and thanked her for the candor, but also she added to the body of knowledge.
You do get lucky sometimes and find some jewels that just pop out of nowhere. How many buildings, houses do you have in modern San Diego now, approximately?
A friend of mine scrubbed my site just as an exercise of cutting and pasting, and he was at something like 1,000.
1,000, good.
Which is a good number, just like a round number, but it literally was that high. I was surprised that I have annotated something on my website that is an address or a location or a project or a building. Most of them built. I do annotate if they're not built. But that also covers gas stations and banks and churches, and it's not just houses. I've been trying to annotate every address in a tract, which is, that just exponentially drives the numbers, right? So there's a tract of houses by a local San Diego architect, Henry Hester. I drove there, I looked at them, I Google mapped them, I put all the pieces together. I go, okay, in this tract, there's 35 good examples. I left all the others that are just remodeled beyond recognition off. But still, that's 30 new addresses to my site in
Yeah.
an afternoon, right?
Yeah.
So it can grow.
It's a great haul. It's like
Yeah.
you're a shrimp trawler.
Yes. Great example.
Yeah. So, we got some extra here.
Yeah. And then sometimes 2 days ago, someone just said, hey, my dad did this house in this neighborhood. I'm like, okay, today I got one. Not a shrimp haul.
Yeah.
A single fly fish, one fish catch, right?
Oh.
But it was important for me to find a street I've been on, a house I've looked at, but the foliage and the facade don't read the way that when you look from the house, like the pool area or from the inside out, you would see the modernist line. But the front yard has palms and all this foliage, and it doesn't read, right? But here I've been on the street, I've looked right at the house, and I feel I'm pretty good at identifying the aesthetic, practical angles or whatever of modern architecture. And she's like, no, my dad did this house for my uncle. And I was able to put one address. It took me all afternoon, but one address.
I've done that, yeah. Now, I would assume, as a realtor and a devotee of this with 1,000 buildings in your library, that people call you and want you to play private detective
Yes.
for their houses, like figure out who designed my house, right?
I get that email routinely. I always answer them, and I want to give somebody an answer. I want to give them my expertise or my time. But the personnel hours required to even really logically figure out who designed a house that none of us know who designed. I can't call a friend. I can't call you.
Yeah.
I don't already have it in my computer. It takes a lot of work to go from I don't know to definitively who designed something.
Yeah.
And if it was published and somebody famous took the photo, very easy. If it's
Yeah.
been in magazines, very easy, right? But ultimately, the people that call me at this stage in the game, right, have no idea who designed their house. The people that they bought it off of 10 years ago didn't know. No one knows. And they're like, so I'll get an email, hey, do you know who designed my house? And I'm like, well, what's your address? And I'll look at it on Google Maps. I'm like, oh, I actually... Here's like 95th percentile. I'm pretty sure this is it, right? So I can help people, and I do, but sometimes it's a labor of love. I'm like, how much am I going to give to this person? Because the homeowner really should roll up their sleeves and dig into this. So sometimes I share the resources, like where I find this information,
Right.
and I'm like, happy trails. Please connect back if you do resolve who designed your house.
So in my situation, because our archive has gotten so big now, people come to my house unannounced with minivans or trucks full of stuff.
With more stuff.
That they want to donate, which is great because we'll take it all. Do you get people that want to donate things to you to be preserved?
Not as often and not in truckloads, but here and there.
Yeah.
And it's mostly because I've established a personal connection and a rapport with them. I don't have an address that you can drive your truck and hand me stuff. So, for example, earlier when we were talking about the AIA newsletters from across the country, there's a wealth of information there, right? But there's a short-run magazine called OmniArt that the architects of the AIA chapter put together.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
That, I had been looking for a full, complete run for decades. And the other day, an architect who I had befriended 15 years ago finally said, you know what? I don't read them anymore. You can have them. So now I have a complete run.
Excellent.
But you couldn't go to a store, you couldn't go to an estate or garage sale and happen upon this because it was so limited.
Yeah.
And it's the best thing I think it's one of my favorite books or periodicals I own, partially because the way it looks and the way it reads and the way it feels on your fingers. But it's so unique to San Diego that this group of guys and gals that were running the AIA, and they were like, we need a magazine. We need something better than the AIA newsletter. And it's articles, it's narrative, it's composed photography and fonts, different advertisers for that than in the main newsletter. It's really quite an interesting work, but that literally took me a long time of building a rapport with someone before they would give me something. So yeah, it's not truckloads of stuff coming by.
Well, one of the things that I like most often as far as getting phone calls and emails is getting calls from family members of these architects who have found their grandfather or great-grandfather or the house that they visited when they were young on the site. and they're just, practically in tears because this is all coming back to them, and they want to know, like, who owns it now, and are they taking care of it? Does it still exist? A lot of them don't realize that these houses were published, usually locally, in something.
Yes. Or
they won local AIA awards, or they were featured in kind of garden variety things like the Home Builders Tour of 1954,
right,
in which somebody will bring the brochure in. It's in a big folder.
Yeah.
And, this is just like priceless. I mean, you know this when you see these old brochures of house tours and things, and we can't actually save them all, but we pass them on to an archive. We try to go through and extract the data, of where the houses are.
Yeah.
And that gives you more clues. I mean, you've done this, of course.
Yeah, and I think when that family member finds what you've done and tells you how important it is, it makes all the sleuthing worthwhile. As my friends and my family members would probably admit if they were here with us today, George, it's countless hours, right?
Yeah.
With little to no return if you're looking for some tangible return. But a family member...
You make less than a junior cash clerk at McDonald's.
Yes.
On a good day.
On a good day with a full shift, right?
Right.
I have connected with families of architects, families that previously resided in a house, and they say, oh my gosh, if I only knew then what I now know today through your expose, thank you. Like, they'll just give me a sincere... All they can say is, thank you. The previous owners of the houses I've restored as an owner, those people are just tickled that the houses are loved and cherished. And so there's enough of that fuels me to keep going, right? There's enough thanks, and people enjoy what it is that you and I and people like myself do. It's kind of neat.
To see Keith's work, go to modernsandiego.com. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
George Smart was chatting with San Diego modernist Keith York.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. And by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in February 2023 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist compound? Email george@usmodernist.org. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino did some heavy lifting this Modernism Week, researching dozens of guests and making me and George sound thoughtful, clever, and well-informed, even when we were distracted. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another Sitting by the Pool, looking at the mountains, drinking martinis, talking architecture edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.